Be that noise in the background? Do you know what that is?
I think that's the my dog's leash.
Oh, okay, okay. Whatever. Fine. Okay, cool. I'm Charlotte Hohenstein, and you're watching Breakthrough News on BTR Today. Today, we're talking about Tuesday's release of the Senate report on CIA interrogation techniques during the Bush years, which has been 5 years in the making, and has some pretty disturbing findings. With me to discuss is John Neffel, a host of Radio Dispatch on BTR. Thank you, John, for joining me today.
Absolutely glad to be here.
So, John, first of all, how this report was very, very scathing. The general gist of it is that, of course, the CIA routinely misled the White House, routinely misled the public. Torture was used, more brutal methods were used than we knew of, and I guess the sort of crux of the matter, the report says that these methods were unnecessary. How much of a shock is this report? Because it seems like a lot of this conversation has already been happening over the last few years. So what's especially significant about this report?
Yeah, I mean, you're right that a lot of the sort of broad outlines of these programs have been quite well known. What's most shocking is the methods that we didn't know about, the sheer brutality, and to use the word that the New York Times editorial board used, the depravity involved in this truly is sort of mind-boggling. I mean, you had several detainees um, who were subject to what the report refers to as rectal rehydration and rectal feedings. One particularly gruesome footnote: a detainee's lunch tray, which consists of hummus, spaghetti with sauce, nuts, and I think one other thing, is pureed and fed, quote unquote, fed to the detainee rectally. I mean, it's one of the most horrifying things you could possibly imagine. It's the kind of thing that if it had previously showed up in a Hollywood movie, people would say this is beyond the pale. This could never happen. So beyond that, we also learned that the sleep deprivation that detainees were subject to was greater than previously known. Some detainees were kept awake for nearly 140 hours straight, and then given a brief sleep, and then kept awake until they reached 180 hours with barely a night's sleep in between. So we're looking at almost 7 days of continued sleep deprivation. Um, beyond Beyond that, there are examples of detainees being held in with diapers, being chained to the ceiling, being denied even a bucket for human waste, which is something that that then CIA Director Michael Hayden denied at the time. And so the practices that were institutionalized and that were overseen, were I mean truly horrifying, and I think that's where the most shocking elements of this report can be found.
So the CIA is countering, still sticking to its line that, yes, yes, there were mistakes made. Yes, some of these practices were misled, but they're still clinging to the fact that vital information for counterterrorism efforts was acquired through this general program. And that is also something that the Senate report is disagreeing with. How do you resolve that? Is there a clear side in your mind that is correct?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the evidence in one particular case, in the case that the CIA has leaned on the most heavily, the search for Bin Laden. Two of the best reporters at the New York Times, Charlie Savage and Jim Risen, had a story on Tuesday about the what the Senate report says about the hunt for Bin Laden. And when you match up what the CIA claims with what the Senate report claims using CIA cables and emails, which, remember, that's what this report comes from. It's the CIA's own reporting. that they're now disagreeing with. The Senate Intelligence report is far more persuasive. There's tons of reasons to believe that that the information that led to Bin Laden was not primarily obtained because of torture. That the information was not obtained through torture that couldn't have been obtained otherwise, and we see talking points from the CIA that are circulated from their Office of Public Affairs that say that we need to hammer home that what they call EITs, enhanced interrogation techniques, led to Bin Laden, and their own internal reports just don't play that out.
Well, that is very disturbing. The general response to the report seems to be one of horror, but at the same time a sense that it's still necessary that we bring this to light and that we reckon with this and then move forward. How strong is the opposite view of this should not have been brought to light? That this might even be dangerous to have out in the open, perhaps inciting acts of terrorism abroad. How compelling do you think that is, or do you think it was absolutely necessary for the public to actually grapple with this?
What I think is really astounding is that you don't even have many people now saying that the U.S. didn't torture. Right? That's what people were saying for a long time. We didn't torture. We didn't torture. Now people are saying we did torture, but let's not talk about it. Or we tortured, but it was justified because we were scared. You have many Republicans saying exactly what you just said. Let's move on. This gives aid and comfort to the enemies. And I think that is completely morally bankrupt. I also think, by the way, that it's totally morally bankrupt that there have been no prosecutions and that two different administrations, departments of justice, haven't been able to prosecute a single person for what are now crimes that are so shocking that the entire world is talking about their brutality. I mean, it really is an indictment of both the Bush and the Obama departments of justice that two different investigations yielded no indictments of anyone involved in these programs. And so not only should this information have come out, it should have come out much sooner. There should also the CIA's own internal review, which is informally referred to as the Panetta Review, which we know from statements that Mark Udall made today on the Senate floor, largely confirms what the Senate Intelligence Committee found, despite the CIA's now public denials. Their own still classified internal review reportedly largely confirms what the Senate found. Not only should all of that information be public, but people should be prosecuted. The only way that you ensure that torture doesn't happen in the future is if people go to jail. Powerful people, mid-level people, if necessary, the lower-level people. But this idea that we can, as Obama has always said, look forward, not backward, is preposterous. And in New York City, we see this policing theory of broken windows, right, where the smallest infraction has to be policed to the extreme. Selling loose cigarettes, jaywalking has to be policed to the extreme. But when you get to truly horrific crimes committed by the CIA in total secrecy, there are no prosecutions. And I think that is not only a violation of international law. Prosecutions under the Convention Against Torture are mandatory. They're not suggested. They're mandatory. And so this information coming to light is a good step in the right direction, but without prosecutions, the effect will be limited.
Isn't part of the problem that at the time this program was legal in many ways? That there was confusion over the legality, and ultimately it seemed like some of the practices were given the green light.
I think that there was confusion over how much what the report refers to as the fig leaf actually covered. But make no mistake that prior to any of the implementation of this program, the CIA specifically requested from the DOJ a promise that nobody would be prosecuted. So they were asking for proactive immunity from what they knew was going to be at the very least questionable, if not outright illegal. And so finding somebody in the Office of Legal Counsel, which is where John Yoo was, who wrote the infamous torture memo, finding somebody in the OLC to say whatever you want to do torture-wise is not torture, which is essentially what John Yoo and another lawyer named Jay Bybee said. Getting somebody to rubber stamp policies that you had already decided on with the sort of sheen of legality, I think, is not the same as something being legal. And I think that it's when the CIA says that we have been given the go-ahead by the DOJ, well, that may be true in the most limited of ways, but relying on memos and legal reasoning that has since been discredited by the entire legal community means that it was probably never solid to begin with.
Well, we are going to take a quick break. We'll be right back in a moment after this quick excerpt from the latest episode of Live Studio featuring Flowers. Music break.
Can you give me 1 second here? My dog is going crazy. 1 sec. You had a good time looking at my feet.
Does the dog want to join the interview?
Rosie.
Is your dog okay? You can just totally have her sitting in the frame if you want.
I may. Sorry, having a teething puppy doesn't make for doing remote interviews very well.
Just like have her on your lap or whatever.
Yeah, I think that will be okay now.
Okay. Was everything okay at the vet last week?
Yeah, she was just getting spayed.
Oh, okay, cool.
But so she still has a cone on her head.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. We are back with our discussion on the very controversial report on CIA interrogation techniques that came out this week with John Neffel. So, John, let's switch gears a bit. How do you think Obama has handled this? Because he certainly has condemned torture practices, even specifically seeming to refer to CIA activities, but at the same time he's sort of stayed very, very non-committal and still ultimately supportive of the CIA, it seems.
Oh, without question. I think that Obama's handling of this has been terrible. Look at the way that the White House responded on Tuesday and Wednesday. They said that they're not going to get in the middle of this feud between the Senate and the CIA, where the Senate on the one hand says that torture was ineffective and the CIA says that it was effective. The White House is saying we're staying out of this battle. That is the definition of abdicating your duty. 1 sec, sorry. Sorry, can
do you want to answer that from the beginning?
Yeah.
Cut that out. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Do you want me to ask the question again, or do you want to just...
No, I can just jump right in. Cool. Obama has been absolutely terrible on this issue. He, you don't have to look any farther than what the White House has said following the release of this report. They said that they're not going to get in the middle of this debate, so-called, between the Senate Intelligence Committee on the one hand, who says that torture is not effective, and the CIA, who says that torture is effective. The White House says, we're staying out of this. That's virtually a direct quote from White House Press Secretary Josh Earnest. And that is the very definition of abdicating your duty as, what people voted for a transformational president. I mean, I think that if voters who who lined up by the millions to vote for Obama in 2008 could see his reaction right now, they would be incredibly disappointed. Uh, and I think that it's a real testament to how mediocre at best his administration has been on closing the chapter on the worst of the Bush excesses. And I mean, the fact that John Brennan, who initially was seen as too close to the torture program to be confirmed to head the CIA, now is the head of the CIA and is a former top advisor to Obama, I think really betrays where his actual confidences, where his actual allegiances lie. I mean, this is also coming from now outgoing Senator Mark Udall, who said that, look, even after almost 6 years now of a Democratic administration, we had to fight tooth and nail to get this report out. And he was worried that the White House would ultimately step in, as they've been stepping in on the CIA's behalf, and push for more redactions. So I think that there's really it's a very much answered question where Obama comes down on this. And I think that it's much more on the side of the CIA than the Senate Intelligence Committee.
Well, how do you think this report is going to affect bipartisan politics in general? Because it also might be that Obama doesn't want to weigh in and exacerbate more gridlock in a very delicate political situation.
That's possible, but I think that when you look at foreign policy and especially policy, matters of war, there's actually much more agreement between the two parties. Look at the new nominee for Defense Secretary, Ashton Carter. He's going to sail through. Everyone on both sides of the aisle loves him, and he somewhat famously advocated for the preemptive bombing of North Korea in 2006. Nobody on Capitol Hill really is pushing for prosecutions. And so I think that when it comes to foreign policy, in almost every single respect, there is actually a great deal of agreement between the two parties. And when it comes to domestic stuff, the GOP is going to block Obama no matter what he tries to do. And so I think that if lessening so-called partisan gridlock is playing into their equation whatsoever, I think that is just a terrible miscalculation.
Do you think that this report absolves Bush in some ways? Because part of it was saying that he was misled by the CIA.
Yeah, what's interesting is that the report says he was misled, and then now he and Cheney are saying, no, we weren't. I think that's largely Bush sort of saying that that's his sort of I'm the decider swagger really showing its head again. I don't think that it absolves Bush. I mean, I think that to the extent that he may not have known that individual detainees were being held from the ceiling with chains in diapers, it's possible that he didn't know that until 2006. But he knew what was going on, and the whole program was predicated on a presidential finding that was issued days after 9/11. Cheney is perhaps even more at fault than Bush. But I think that to read the report and come away with the impression that Bush had somehow been left out of the loop, I think would be a real misreading of the actual history here.
Well, we're going to have to wrap up soon. I just want to finish on the note that I found quite compelling, that seems to be forgotten a lot, which is also the human costs for the people doing the torturing, many of whom I have to believe probably are themselves traumatized by this program. There was a really interesting op-ed in the New York Times by Eric Fair, who was pretty open about the fact that he was part of this and that it's basically scarred him for the rest of his life. And that's sort of another angle on it. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm certainly sympathetic to that, and I think that reading over this report, you see repeated examples of people who are tasked with doing these interrogations saying this is a runaway train and I want to get off before the whole thing explodes. You have other analysts and CIA agents who are described as tearing up, getting choked up during the course of one of the interrogations of the so-called first detainee, Abu Zubaydah. So there's no question that reading this report over, you get a sense of the human trauma that that CIA and CIA contractors underwent as part of implementing this program. At the same time, it's a little bit I think it's a little bit hard to feel bad for them without including the effect that this torture had on the dozens of people who were subjected to it, and many of whom have been accused of terrible things. I actually just interviewed the lawyer for one of the co-defendants in the 9/11 trial. The lawyer's name is Walter Ruiz, and the defendant is named Mustafa al-Hissawi. Hissawi is alleged to have played a role in helping to finance 9/11. Now, if he's convicted of that, that's obviously an incredibly serious crime, and that's something that everyone should take seriously. But he was subject to what the report describes as rectal examinations that consisted of excessive force. And now I've seen him in court at Guantanamo. He sits on a pillow now. He has chronic hemorrhoids. He suffered a rectal prolapse. And whatever you think about the crimes that he's committed of and the evidence against him, I think that we all need to say that sexual assault as a weapon of war, which is exactly what this was, is beyond the pale. And although it may hurt the interrogators, it hurts the person who's being interrogated and the United States as a whole far more.
Yeah, I guess the takeaway is that torture is just absolutely toxic for everyone involved on both sides of the equation.
I think that's absolutely true, yeah.
Well, we're going to stop there. Thank you very much, John, for joining me today. We'll be right back after another excerpt from Live Studio featuring White Reaper. Great. Thanks so much, John.
Absolutely.
Really helpful. Good luck with the dog.
Thanks. Have a good one.
Bye.